We have nothing stirring, not yet at least. Let's go ahead and take a closer look at the current state of the tropics. We have the one and only Fox Weather hurricane specialist Brian Norcross joining us. Brian, we've missed you. We've missed you. We always appreciate the break that we have with the tropics, but when I see you pop up, when I see your face, it means we're getting close.
Yeah. Well, it means that we've kind of turned to the first chapter here, which is the beginning of these outlooks. And it's actually the first day of the hurricane season in the Eastern Pacific. And I'll show you why the season there starts earlier than it does in the Atlantic here in just a second. But let's look out across the ocean and see what's going on right now. As you probably expect, no tropical development is expected here over the next 7 days in either one of the two basins. Now, what's going on as terms of the wind flow and what development we have, you see it's all in a belt down here. That's called the intertropical convergence zone. And here you see the winds coming this way, the northern hemisphere, and coming this way in the southern hemisphere, and converging in that belt. That's why it's called the convergence zone. Notice it's doing that in both basins here, in both oceans. The winds converge, and that's a typical feature that moves slowly to the north as we get in toward the summer season. So that's where we stand right now, but nothing is forecast to develop out of that. It's too far south. If it reaches a little farther north, then maybe. All right, let's take a look at each basin at a time here. Here's the Atlantic, and again, we see only down here the intertropical convergence zone. These storms up here are kind of related to an old front, so nothing going on there. In terms of the upper level winds, this is why we don't have many storms this time of year. There's a belt of upper level winds comes across the south and then kind of screams on across the Atlantic. So that's blocking anything from developing there. The only spots that are maybe slightly conducive are down in here and over in here underneath of that belt of wind. So we're going to look at both of those, and this is where we're going to keep an eye on this time of year, where we see places where we don't have strong upper level winds. So let's move this forward for the next week and see how the upper level winds evolve. You see they continue on across the Atlantic, so not expecting anything there. But notice here around Central America, they get very light. So this is the area maybe next week that we'll keep a little stronger eye on after that 7-day period. Out in the Atlantic, one of the things that's shutting off any kind of activity and normally does this time of year is the dust. There's a big plume of dust, and this is usually there on at least through July. By the end of July, it can start to break up. So that kind of shuts off this area between Africa and the islands called the main development region. On the satellite, you can kind of make out the milkiness out in there. You see that? Right there, that's that's what we see from the satellite. That's that Saharan dust. In terms of the water temperatures, again, out there in the Atlantic, it's cool out in here. So again, that's just another reason for no development expected here. Plenty warm in the Caribbean and the Southern Gulf. Still kind of cool in the Northern Gulf right now. But again, this area down in here is where we'll probably start watching first. All right, into the Pacific we go. Now we're looking at a different kind of thing. We're looking how above normal or below normal the water temperatures are, and we're looking in this box here called the Nino 3.4 box, and it looks more or less average. Look, some areas are a little yellow, some blue, so the net of that is essentially average there, and that's where we look for an El Nino or La Nina. And when it's kind of average, we have neither, and we call that neutral. And in neutral years, well, that means we don't have any big forcing from the El Nino or La Nina, so we just take that kind of factor out of play and say, okay, what's going to happen in the hurricane season in the Atlantic is going to all pretty much occur in the Atlantic. It's not going to get pushed into more or less by this El Nino or La Nina in the Pacific. Except there is another wrinkle going on, and that is when we look at the water temperatures on a wide view, look how warm it is up here in the Pacific, and generally warm over here in the Atlantic. So relatively speaking, this is actually pretty cool in here, which was called kind of a relative El Nino La Nina. So this would be a relative La Nina, which could be a little more of an oomph toward more storms in the Atlantic. Could. That's kind of a new thing to look at, is this relative temperature of the area there south of Hawaii. So anyway, we'll keep an eye on all this. As of right now, when we look at the Pacific, what do we see? We see this cluster we showed you in the intertropical convergence zone. That's it. But as we look at the upper level winds, we're going to watch this pocket here I talked about around Central America, because the strong band of winds from Hawaii into the U.S. is farther to the north. So that's not going to be there. Where the winds are strong, it's not going to be a factor. But there in that area of Central America, that's what we're going to keep an eye on to see if something might develop there. Guys, back to you.
Brian, lots to watch. You know, listen, no two seasons are often alike, and especially not back to back. But I wanted to ask you, as we approach this season, we talked a lot about last season and the factors that influenced our development, some of the limiting factors, things like the northern track of the monsoon and the dust and the stability aloft with those warmer temperatures. Anything that you're looking at this year that could maybe bleed into this season?
Well, the big thing is that the Atlantic water temperatures all the way across the Atlantic, including the Caribbean and the Gulf, are significantly lower than last year. The water is still going to be plenty warm to support tropical storms and hurricanes. There's no question about that. But when you add a couple, 3, 4 degrees to the water temperature, that's more energy, and therefore weaker storms get stronger, storms tend to develop sooner, and so forth. So we don't have that this year, where the water is significantly cooler, but still not so cool that we're not expecting storms.
You know, Brian, talking about water temperature, you mentioned a little bit the northern part of the Gulf, right? Cooler now, but now we're watching this ridge set up, a prolonged period of heat. And I know Matthew Blue thought it too. We were all talking. Yep. I feel like we're going to see that temperature start to rise, naturally so, but maybe over the next 7 days.
Yeah, so in the northern Gulf, the water is relatively shallow there, especially in the very northern Gulf where you're on the shelf. And so that just responds to cold fronts, and that responds to the wind direction a lot. But when we get to the summertime, the wind direction becomes much more consistent, kind of from the south or southeast there. So the warm water from the south gets pushed toward the northern Gulf. You don't have cold fronts anymore. So, we expect this time of year to still have the residual effects of the cooler season there in the northern Gulf. But as we get closer into June in the summertime, then that factor is going to go away.
Yeah. I mean, as we always say, it is a fluid. The atmosphere is a fluid, and everything it's all connected in some way. So, all right, Brian, we always appreciate your insight. As it is now, it is time to start focusing in on the tropics. Appreciate you. Fox Weather Hurricane Specialist Brian Norcross.